So if you're good with your top hand, you bring that rod out and around and you draw the anchor coming in and the bottom of the D loop. Okay, I'm on the river with the Gale Force 14-foot 7/8. It's the G Plus, the graphene model, and on it we have the 38-foot Gale Force equalizer shooting head, and it's kind of like a little bit longer Scandi head, and this is fabulous. And so I'm going to tell you, I mean, this rod has got plenty of power and it's got a little bit of soul. It's got a lot of soul, but it's not sloppy soul. It's just perfect. This is a perfect flex, in my opinion. It's forgiving yet powerful. It's really forgiving. And so here's what I would say for casting tips. Number one, let's start thinking less about what our hands are doing. I think you're better served to think about the rod and what the rod tip is doing. We don't want to get crazy with our hands, but we want to think about the rod tip, and we want to think about smoothness and integrating all the casts together. So with this particular setup, well, with all setups, okay, let's say this is like Scandi, or you got a Scandi head or a short belly and you're doing touch and go casts. First thing I would say is make sure that the lift is smooth and fairly reasonably slow. You don't want to get it so slow that you don't get control of the fly by getting it to move and getting it to come up in the water column. And then the next thing is you got to transition really smoothly into the sweep, because if you get a nice slow lift and then you let it snag and then you start your sweep too sudden, you're going to get a little shock in your rod and it's going to make the line get out of kilter, and you're not going to have that smooth transition into a D-loop. You're going to have a funny shaped D-loop. And we want the D-loop to be, whether it's a D or a V, we want that lift and sweep to just melt in together with each other, so we got smoothness into the sweep. We don't want a lift and then a sag and then a sweep and a shock. We want to lift high and smooth and slow and then right into the sweep with smoothness, okay? We don't want to lift too high. If we do, we'll have to dip our rod. We want to smooth it towards the target and then right into the sweep. Okay, so smooth lift, smooth sweep. So really, this is a continuation of my review. Yesterday I did a review of Gale Force 14-foot 7/8, and it is spectacular. I have here the Gale Force 14 910. The 910 is also spectacular. It's a little more, well, it's more powerful, obviously. It's more of a 8 weight for us Americans, 8/9, with the tributary, the 8/9 tributary on the 910 14-foot Gale Force, and this thing is so easy to cast. This is my idea of the perfect rod. It is so nice. And so the 14 7/8 that I cast yesterday, we had the equalizer shooting head, which is 38 foot, the Gale Force equalizer shooting head. And that was a match made in heaven. That rod feels a tad softer than this one, but it's got this releasing on, it releases that line going forward, and it's just got so much power, and it's got so much soul. It just is a blast to fish with. Like I was yesterday, I was fishing my old Guideline Lacey, which I love, and I had a tributary on that, but that rod is not made for casting a tributary. It's a Scandi rod for short Scandi head. So the difference between a 14, now that rod is only 13.7, but the difference between a 13.7 underhand style rod, which is pretty stiff, my friends call it the zero feedback rod, but I like it, and casting that gale force with this tributary is just night and day. Of course it's 5 inches longer, but the action, it just like, it has, that 7/8 is so forgiving and so soulish and so powerful that you'd be hard pressed to find an easier rod to cast, I think. And here's what we're working on with my friend who had I surround myself with friends who have really cool gale force rods. And what my friend was working on, well, what I was working on with him, is he has like impeccable form art almost. But form is for function, or form is so you get your line, keep your line tight. So you can have the best form with your hands, do everything right, and if it's not smooth, if there's any slack, if it's, you can just tell so much from the shape of the D-loop. And if it's nice and round and full, or nice and pointy and tight, as opposed to one that's like short on the bottom and then goes up kind of funkily or squared off, that is all. That's why the lift and the sweep are so important, and the transition between the lift and the sweep are so important, so you keep tension in your D-loop. And when the D-loop has tension in it, I'm not looking for ultra power in the D-loop necessarily, but slack free tension in the D-loop. And if you have a jerky lift, and then your tempo isn't correct, you're not flowing and fluid, and your tempo is all out of sync, then you can have perfect form and you can have a bad D-loop. So it's real important however you do it. If you want to lift with your hands here, that's fine, or out here or up here. To me, I haven't seen a huge difference for fishing, you know. So I wouldn't be all freaked out about your hand position on your lift. And quite honestly, my friend was. He was like, the lift is like, oh, the lift is talked about so much, it's almost overthought. My favorite lift guy is Zach Williams, who says, I don't really think about it too much. The one thing he does do is when he gets that rod up in a slow lift, he goes right into the sweep, and you can't tell a difference in the shape of the line because it's smooth, say, okay? So he's not, you know, it's great if you have your hands in a great position. That's all good, but most guys I know who are worried about the fulcrum, and this is my friend yesterday. He is a good technician and a good caster. But most people who know about the fulcrum have way more problems on their hands than if they're casting with the fulcrum, because they're lifting and then probably too fast. You know, lift and then sweep and jar the rod, and the line gets funky, and so that nice D-loop we're looking for turns into a rectangle or square or some wiggly mess when we want smoothness. so that D-loop is, so there's no slack. And so it's the strokes, the lift, the sweep, the drift, and the forward stroke. Those are all separate things, but to go between each stroke, each of those 4 strokes, you have to keep the tension, and that is created by the correct tempo, being slow and smooth, accelerating slightly at the end of the sweep, having a drift that doesn't interrupt the line flying through the air, okay? Because we're trying to have, whether you use continuous motion or not, or think about continuous motion, we're trying to ultimately have continuous tension, okay? And you can stop the rod and pause and still have continuous tension in the cast.
Yeah, so, you know, lift, sweep, cast.
These gale force rods, I swear, the line just flies off them. They're almost as perfect as you can imagine. They are fishing rods. Amazing, so smooth. Okay, don't overthink the continuous motion. Think about making a beautiful loop. And to do that, it almost does help to keep your motion continuous, but don't be a slave to it. If you sweep back and have to wait for your line to land, that's fine. You do whatever works for you, but instead of worrying about perfect hand placement and obsessing and freaking out about it, worry about keeping tension in your line system the entire time. Sweep, cast. That will totally improve your cast, totally. Have somebody watch you or video your D-loop, video your sweep. And what we're looking for when we video, when we see the different parts of our line in different parts of the cast, is we're really looking for squiggles and odd shapes and slack. We want everything to be tight, and that's more tempo and smoothness and slight acceleration over too fast acceleration. Okay, so that is what we worked on. And the other thing that we worked on is the top hand has to be it really is helpful to have really good top hand control in the cast, because the top hand guides that perfect shape. And what it does, the top hand guides when I'm thinking about having the perfect anchor, and sometimes I'm fishing, my anchor gets sloppy, then my casting starts getting a little weird. So I'll go back to when I sweep. Of course, I'm trying to do it with body rotation and a little bottom hand, wherever you want to apply that bottom hand, and use the body rotation. But that top hand is going out and around, so I'm not cutting the corner and going back and forth. So if you're good with your top hand, you bring that rod out and around, and you draw the anchor coming in and the bottom of the D-loop, okay? So sweep is this beautiful wrist. You have to have loose wrists. Keeping your wrist loose on that sweep is very, very helpful. And it helped my buddy yesterday to just, be able to rotate your bottom hand or your top hand around. Okay, so if your anchor is getting sloppy and your D-loop's getting goofy draw with that top hand. Imagine it, just the top hand coming around. Like for shorter lines, I might have my top hand in here. For longer lines, coming around, and just beautiful rotation, beautiful wrist action. Okay, so it's that top hand rotation. That is really where you get that beautiful D-loop, as well as pushing with the bottom hand. And yeah, and the top hand is, there's resistance there for sure, but we're not ripping it back with a stiff wrist. We're rotating it around, casting that way. So that could be a game changer for you. On is the top hand